going on, guys? NHL. These are some of my favorite slates of the entire year, just because most people have basically kind of been playing NBA for all this time, and then those people have nothing to play for a couple days. So yeah, you guys could be doing anything right now, but you're here. For that, I'm quite grateful. So yeah, Sean Newsham, aka PSU fans, has come out of his NHL tout retirement and will be gracing the stream with his presence yet again. Sean, how's it going, man?
Yeah, not bad. Much better than last night. Last night was a bit of a rough time once we got home from dinner. So glad to be through that. And yeah, I mean, we have a Sabre slate, which is obviously the only reason I agreed to come on. So, I mean, you can't really beat that at all.
Yeah, I opened up the slate today and I just saw the total, saw who they were playing, and saw who like the majority of my top trends were, and they were all Sabres. So I just figured I maybe would just shut up and let you talk. That's why I unmuted you and didn't unmute myself.
Yeah, I mean, you unmuted the more important person. So, I mean, I can't really
Correct.
blame you on that fact.
Correct. But yeah, man, tell the people what happened to you last night, man. A little food poisoning action. You're kind of battling through the elements for our listeners right now.
Yeah, we went to a nice dinner. It tasted very good. We came home and oh my god, I was in the bathroom for in like the entire night. I probably spent over an hour in the bathroom from like 7 p.m. to like midnight, and it was just not a good time at all. So, luckily, I was able to get to sleep around like 1, and I was able to sleep through the night, and it's not been bad since I woke up. So that's the plus side of things, at least.
Good stuff, man. Well, we're going to go through kind of our old routine. Obviously, for the people that have kind of been with us since the beginning, we used to do this show almost every single day. Obviously, we can't show you anything behind the paywall from any companies, obviously, but we'll kind of go through the same routine. We'll kind of start kind of a broad perspective about today's slate. Obviously, only 4 games, but yeah, like Bobby was saying in the chat, there are some decent tournaments out there, and we always kind of see that this time of year. So we'll start kind of broad on the slate. We'll talk some stacks at the end, but we'll probably go position by position. I know some people, at least in the Discord, have been grinding a ton of showdown and tiers, so we'll touch on that quickly as well. But we'll just kind of see where things take us. But Sean, you've been around for a while, man. Like, how's the action on these slates? I know that in the past they've ramped up the tournaments, but does it look pretty standard so far this today?
Yeah, action usually is really great around an NBA All Star break because people have nothing to play. It's a bit different now because there's more options. Like you have tennis, you have soccer, you have things that weren't around maybe 4 years ago. That when NBA was on All Star break, it was literally NHL. That said,
It's
still
nothing
the bigger
else.
prize pools end up being NHL, and a majority of the NBA guys, if they're bored over these couple days, they're going to at least go through and fire some lineups and tournaments and stuff. If not, just play full NHL for a 4 or 5 day stretch.
Yeah, so last night, basically just played props and did a bunch of Monkey Knife Fight games, stuff like that, just because I had the Valentine's Day type debacle that I had to deal with, as well as I'm sure a lot of you did. But today is a new day, so we got a nice 4 game slate to talk about. So let's just start on this team ratings page, Sean. That's where we kind of used to always start our shows, and the big part of kind of starting here before the Vegas page is I want to have an idea about the slate from kind of a peripheral stats perspective. Like, if anyone watched any of the NHL week shows, you'll know how important it is in NHL to really stack up shots and block shots. So I want to see which game environments are the strongest. And so looking at this page, on the far right side here that we're sorting by, this is a Corsi for expectation. So it takes into account the defensive stats monthly. It also takes into account the offensive stats on both sides of the puck. So basically, this is one of the first things I'm sorting by when I open up a slate. So Boston against Anaheim, a lot of that does have to do with how poor Anaheim has been defensively lately. So they are in the 95th percentile in Corsi allowed over the past month. So 52.36, pretty massive number. So obviously it's a great spot for Boston, even though they are on the road. Not really that surprising, really, to see Carolina towards the top. I feel like we've been saying this for like years now, Sean. It's like basically Carolina, their whole kind of system revolves around a lot of shots on goal. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get there, but they have been getting there with goals lately as well. So over the past month, leading the slate in goals for. So those are our top two Corsi situations. Sean, I will let you talk about Buffalo at some point, I promise. But what do you think about those two Corsi situations at the top?
Yeah, it's not surprising seeing Carolina up there. It's not surprising seeing Boston up there. Anaheim's just really, really bad right now. So when you get a Boston team against Anaheim, it's going to be a situation that is very productive. But also Carolina, They're a team we've talked about. If you watched our show at the beginning of the year when we were over at Fantasy Labs, you would see Carolina every single day would be up there. They generate a ton of shots. The only difference was at the beginning of the season they weren't really scoring. They've picked things up over the last month or two. They're in the playoff hunt now, but they still generate a lot of shots. Nothing changed, which goes to our whole talk when we say people that take a lot of shots are eventually going to start scoring. It usually is going to be the case, and that is actually what has happened with Carolina. So you see they've been scoring over the last month. They are averaging 3.67 goals, which is tops on the slate. So they're definitely a team to consider, especially on a small slate like this. You know they're going to produce. You know that they have a decent matchup against Edmonton, who is not great. So it's a very solid situation for Carolina as well.
This Edmonton team, man, like I hate these games. Like earlier in the week, we had a Pittsburgh slate against Edmonton, and it's just like, yeah, stack out Pittsburgh at home, and then they end up getting some kind of strange goals in that game, and then obviously the McDavid line scores and just ruins everything. But yeah, so these Edmonton games are really interesting to me. So if we're just looking at teams outside of Anaheim, obviously that have been giving up a ton of shots, like I mean, the thing is about Edmonton, they're not giving up a ton of shots, but they're just giving up so many goals. So it's kind of I don't know, it's not necessarily a high variance spot, but I mean, a team that gives up a lot of goals against a team that's scoring a lot of goals lately, probably don't overthink that a ton. So I think that I wouldn't be surprised if Carolina's towards the top of the implied total as well. What do you think about Boston? Both these teams, or at least the Boston side of things, that they are on the road in Anaheim. Is that a spot you're looking at earlier today as well?
Yeah, I think there's four spots that stand above the rest for tonight. Carolina, Boston, Buffalo, and Minnesota are the four spots that are better spots in general, for one reason or another. So I think Boston definitely makes a lot of sense. Anaheim's been so poor lately. You have a situation where it is a road game, so that's a bit of a hit to them. But Anaheim just been so dreadful that I think it still makes a lot of sense.
Man, I actually like going after Boston on the road because then I know that Bergeron and that line is not going to be matched up against the top line for the other team, ideally. So I think that it's actually interesting. It's one of the things we looked at a while back. Bergeron's road splits are actually pretty solid. But in the chat, we actually had a really good question. So without Pasta and that first line, that first power play unit for Boston, I believe he's out 2 weeks or so. Do you think that's going to affect the ownership at all? I still think people are going to be on Boston for sure.
Yeah, I think everyone's going to be in Boston still as well. I just think that ownership, instead of being spread out a little bit more between the three of them, it's just going to be more geared towards Marchand and Bergeron. So I think the ownership's going to be similar, maybe a slight downtick just because there's not three of them. But I think that you're going to see Bergeron and Marchand be higher owned than you would normally see, and then the ownership that would have normally gone to Pasternak will be moved towards them a little bit.
One of the teams I think is somewhat underrated and kind of under the radar, at least on this sheet so far as well, is the Minnesota Wild against New Jersey. New Jersey just hasn't been that great this year after a great season last year. So over the past month, they do have the second highest Corsi against, although we do have some good defensive teams on this slate that we should kind of mention. But I think that depending on what the Vegas lines tell us, I think that Minnesota is at least interesting. So Buffalo and the Rangers right in the middle here. Nothing really stands out on this page for that. But if we do move over to the Vegas dashboard, you'll see that they are just outside the top tier. So we talk about in tournaments, like I always really like to attack these teams when I think that ownership is going to skew towards a couple of the top. So Buffalo, Boston, like these are two teams that I'm extremely interested in. Obviously Boston against Anaheim, who gives up a ton of shots, and then Buffalo with kind of this total, and there's a lot of really nice pieces on that side of it. So Sean, what do you think about Buffalo today? I don't even know if I should ask you this, but because I already know, but tell the people.
Yeah, I mean, Buffalo's really strong. The reason Buffalo's so strong is Skinner and Eichel are so good regardless. They produce peripheral stats very well. They score goals. They're the top line. They're correlated well. So, in regards to them, they make a lot of sense, and they're definitely highly correlated between each other. Minnesota, the reason people generally have problems with Minnesota is Minnesota doesn't have like that go-to line or go-to skaters that other teams have. So when you see Minnesota be this big of an implied total, you sort of see things skew a little bit because they're just not quite as strong as other teams are in terms of a line that drives all the value. They sort of spread things out more. As you can see, like, I really like Stahl. I think he's a really solid option. And there's a lot of solid options on their team, even on the back end with a guy like Spurgeon as well. but they just don't have that line like Eichel and Skinner where you know where the production is more likely to come from.
Yeah, the correlation's always kind of been an issue with Minnesota. Like we have guys like Parise that make really nice one-off plays in tournaments just because we know he's going to shoot the puck a lot. But their correlation, even strength over to the power play, it doesn't always kind of coincide seamlessly. So interesting to see them with a 3.8 total. That's quite a bit higher than I thought it would be. But they are at home. Obviously, we talked about how bad New Jersey's been. This is a massive money line in favor of the Wild as well, 254. So I would imagine that Dubnyk, whoever ends up being the starter for the Wild today, is going to be extremely popular. But yeah, so Boston at the top as well. So anything surprising on the Vegas page in terms of action? That seems like a pretty big favorite, even though the Wild have been playing well.
That seems like a little bit too big of a favorite to me. I feel like they should be like minus 180 or minus 200. I feel like they shouldn't be as high as they are. But as you see, the money is going in heavily towards them. It's already moved 44 points in their favor in a situation where they were already a big favorite as well. So I think that Minnesota is a good spot for tonight. I think that Buffalo, it sort of makes sense that they're getting bet down a little bit because the Rangers don't give up tons of shots. So that's something Joe's talked about with Monkey Knife Fight, that he just pounds Lundqvist unders because they just don't give up tons of shots anymore, whereas they used to give up a lot of shots. So I think that makes quite a bit of sense with Buffalo sort of moving away from them, but I still like Buffalo as well tonight.
Yeah, let's move to some more position by position type stuff. So the first team I do want to talk about though is Buffalo. So let's move over to that. So I'm using left wing lock for a lot of the stuff because I really like their power play usage stuff on here. So if you see anything that looks out of whack, Sean, definitely let me know. But Skinner, Eichel, and Palmaville are expected to be on that first line. If we're just looking at their power play, they're both correlating on the power play as well. My issue is because of what Sean just said. So the New York Rangers 16th percentile over the past month in Corsi against. So they're just really not giving up a ton of shots. Definitely still think that Eichel is squarely in play. When I opened up my trends today, Jack Eichel matched for more trends than any player. He has the second highest shot prediction behind Bergeron. So 93rd percentile in shots, 91st in blocks. So he's one of the few players on this slate in the 99th percentile in shots plus blocks. It's literally just him and Bergeron at the top. Corsi 92nd percentile. So he's checking a lot of boxes for me. I still think in a vacuum, if we're just talking about centerman, I still prefer Bergeron for 300 more, but I'm curious your thoughts on the Bergeron versus Eichel debate because I think that's a decision a lot of people are going to have to make today.
Yeah, I think it's a really close decision. I think that you can make a case for either or. Obviously, I would go with Buffalo. That's just because I prefer Buffalo. And if I have the options of two guys that are pretty similar in expectations for me, I'm going to take the team that I actually like over Boston.
Sure.
But there's not much difference between the two. They both do similar things. So it's not really a situation in which you have an elite option between the two. But yeah, like I like the Buffalo stack. You can do a Skinner, Eichel, like Ristolainen stack, and it works. It's a bit more expensive than you'd want it to be, though, unfortunately. Like earlier in the season, you would have seen probably 5K off of that stack. It would have been way cheaper option to use. But I think it makes sense. You have Dahlin up there as well. So Reinhardt's not great. He doesn't really shoot the puck tons, but he does score a lot of the power play because they plant him in front of the net, and he's very good at what he does in front of the net. So in terms of power play options, that's what you have for Buffalo.
Yeah, what do you think about, just from a hockey perspective, what Dahlin's looked like in his rookie season so far?
I mean, he's looked great. He hasn't been like the best player in the world of all time, which, I mean, you wouldn't expect from someone of his age. But when you come into league and you have those expectations, like you pretty much come in and the expectations are that you're going to be the best player in the league or the best player on the team. And he's been very good, but just not quite the best. But what happens is you have centers or guys that come in like McDavid or Crosby, and they end up being an elite player right away. But it's more so of a position thing, I think, than what it would be with a defenseman.
Yeah, I'm going to move over to the Labs Lounge page because I think it might be better to kind of show some of the players and stuff. So another centerman that I really like is Mikael Granlund. So 5,800, if we're just talking about peripheral stats, he's actually right there as shot volume with Jack Eichel and Patrice Bergeron. 5,800. You get a massive savings on this guy. So 93rd percentile in shots, 94th in Corsi. If you guys watch any of our shows during NHL week, you'll know that for centerman, Corsi is one of the most important stats that there is. It is a pretty good matchup, like I said, against New Jersey. I still think that it's just really hard to get away from Bergeron in this spot against Anaheim. But I do think if you need some savings in your center number 2 spot, that Granlund is at least interesting. So a couple other guys that I was kind of looking at. I guess I'll kick this one to you, Sean. Any interest in Connor McDavid against Carolina? Again, talking about an elite player, but in a really tough matchup, 12th percentile in shots against over the past month with Carolina on the other side. Does it really even matter though with McDavid?
No, not really. I mean, McDavid's the best player in the league. The problem is you have other great center options that are slightly cheaper that are in better situations. So it's a situation where you have to sort of make a decision. But again, this is something Joe and I have talked about off stream. Connor McDavid is the best player in the world. So he's a guy that's going to go out there and break slates that he really doesn't have much reason to do so because their matchup may not be great. But he's just that talented that you can really never go wrong with playing him. The option is your opportunity costs are very high. You're giving up a Bergeron, you're giving up an Eichel to play him. So do you really want to do that for a guy that's not in as good of a match? But again, the best player in the world, it's hard to say he's not playable in a situation like that.
So talking about value at the center position, I don't know how you feel about this play. You've probably watched him a lot more than me, but I'm actually interested in Evan Rodriguez. Played with his brother in pro after college. Really skilled guy. His brother, obviously, Evan, is extremely skilled, and his shot volume has actually gone up a little bit lately. He's seen a bit of a spike, 80th percentile in shots over the past month, but he's seeing a lot of power play time on ice as well. So his price at 4,200, there really isn't a lot at the center position to like on the value side of things today. So is this a guy that you would consider if you were really trying to jam in some studs? I don't know. It might be a little thin, but I still think that he's interesting in this game.
No, I think he makes sense. You have a situation where you don't have a lot of options for cheaper centers, but so this might also help you make your decision with Bergeron.
Right.
Let's say you like Buffalo, maybe you go with a Rodriguez line that you can get a little bit cheaper. Maybe you go Rodriguez Sheary type stack, and then all of a sudden you're not going to want to play a Eichel Skinner stack as well with that. So you'd much rather go and play a Bergeron Marchand stack, and it works a little bit better. So maybe that'll be something that helps you in terms of making your decision with where you want to stack.
I totally agree. I do love this Buffalo team from kind of a stacking perspective, even though New York's been so good defensively. I think that they stack so easily together. Rodriguez would be a guy where if I wasn't stacking up this other first power play unit, he might be a guy that would give you some differentiation there. So Jeff Skinner, if we're moving over to wingers at 6,900, again, he's a guy that's been matching a ton of my trends this morning. Just a high volume shooter. We don't always get Eichel and Skinner together, but getting them at even strength out in the power play together definitely makes sense. At 6,900, 96th percentile in shots over the past month, 92nd in Corsi. Yeah, I mean, I think that he's a guy that they're going to be using on the power play heavily for shot volume. Skinner at 6,900 is definitely a priority for me. That you mentioned the Skinner, Eichel, Ristolainen stack. I definitely think that those are the three guys that I would prefer if I'm going to be stacking up this power play. But any further thoughts on Skinner?
Yeah, I mean, Skinner is a guy that just volume shooter. As you see, he had a 10-shot game against Chicago like a little over a week ago. So you're not going to find guys that take 10 shots in a game. When you take 10 shots in a game, it really doesn't matter what else you do. You're going to hit value. Like if you have an 8-shot game, it doesn't really matter. You're basically giving yourself a goal. So if you're a guy that's going to get 8 to 10 shots in a game, which is definitely possible for a guy like Jeff Skinner because that's how he plays, you can't really go wrong with someone like that at any point, especially when they're a decent sized favorite. So Skinner's one of my favorite wingers on the slate tonight just due to his shot volume.
So let's talk about in that same price range, Zach Parise. So 6,700. He's the only winger on the slate in the 99th percentile in shots plus blocks. So you can get Parise and Granlund together. I really like the idea of that. And then if we're just looking over at the power play, we will get both of them together as well. I'm actually going to check that on Left Wing Lock just to make sure that that's kind of how they've been doing their power play usage, because they kind of move things around like we talked about before. So let's just look over the last 10 games for the Wild power play. And yeah, so it looks like Granlund and Parise have been together for the majority of those combinations. But Parise is a guy that we're always kind of targeting for peripherals, 98th percentile in shots over the past month against this New Jersey team. I actually really like him at 6,700. But what do you think about Parise?
Yeah, I think Parise is probably your other elite winger option. Him, Marchand, and Skinner are your like elite wing options for tonight. I think Parise makes a decent amount of sense. He sits there and he also fires the puck. It's a slightly better spot. They have a better team total. So it definitely makes sense to play Parise. And as you talked about, the savings you can get on him and Granlund compared to the other options, you're going to save 2,500 or so. And there's very similar options, if not better options on the night. So I think it makes a decent amount of sense to look at them as well.
Yeah, I like one other guy actually. So, kind of pivoting away from the Wild, a former Wild player. I do think that Nino Niederreiter at 5,600 is somewhat interesting. He's not really a guy that I play a ton, but it's hard to kind of argue with his shot volume kind of recently. So, 95th percentile in shots over the past month at that price. It's really kind of a nice spot for him. He's the 98th percentile on the power play too, so at least you know that he's getting a lot of usage. Like a lot of these shots are coming on the man advantage, which I do think is interesting against this Edmonton team who's given up a ton. Another guy that I want your opinion on, Sean. He's not really a guy we're targeting for volume shooting historically, is Draisaitl. So he's a guy that's really seen a spike lately. As you can see, he had 6 shots in his last game, 95th percentile in shots over the past month. Another guy on the power play. There's only 2 guys on the slate that hit the 98th percentile in power play shots, and he's one of them. So I guess ownership wise, do you think that McDavid and Draisaitl could kind of go underutilized, I guess, and do you kind of buy this recent shot spike from him?
See, I think that their ownership will be quite a bit higher because they've been really productive lately than it probably should be. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, again, they definitely can score. They have chances to get on the board. And the thing with Draisaitl is that his numbers are skewed because of the position he plays. A
Right.
lot of the times he plays center for Edmonton. When he plays center, he doesn't shoot as much. He's
Yeah.
been moved out to McDavid's wing lately. When he's on McDavid's wing, he's the shooter on the line. So for Draisaitl, it just heavily depends where he plays, and you basically have two different players. You have Draisaitl center and Draisaitl winger. So Draisaitl's been on the wing lately, and as you see, his shot volume has indicated that. So I think Draisaitl makes sense. I would rather go with Skinner or one of these other options than Draisaitl just due to pricing and matchup. But that's just me.
Yeah, purely kind of tournament option for me as well. But he's not a guy that I've played a ton of. But that's a really good point that you mentioned. When he is on the wing, he has been more of a high volume shooter playing with McDavid, obviously. As far as like some other guys that I think could go under owned, I think Chris Kreider, Matt Zuccarello, like these guys with Zibanejad, like with everyone on Buffalo, sometimes it makes some sense kind of to go to the other side of that game if you do think there's going to be some pace to it. I don't know how high paced this game's going to be, but Kreider, 84th percentile. You could do worse in the mid range. I definitely think I like some of these other guys we talked about considerably more. On the value side of things, there's really not a ton to like. If we want to go back to Edmonton, you could probably make an argument for Ty Ratty, but he's on the fourth line, it looks like, on this one. But we'll have to check that on Left Wing Lock. But as far as like a volume shooter, 88th percentile in shots over the last month, it's just a tough matchup for him. There's really not a lot of great value, which is concerning considering we want to try and get in Bergeron and some of these elite centermen. So I'm not seeing a ton of great value here for wingers. You could probably maybe a lower exposure play in tournaments, go with someone like Jakob Silverberg. But again, against Boston, it's like we have very big discrepancies, I guess, on which teams give up shots on the slate and which teams don't. So we have like teams like Boston, Carolina, Buffalo that don't give up a ton of shots, but then we also have teams like Anaheim, New Jersey that have been giving up a ton of shots lately. So how are you kind of balancing that when you're looking at your stack exposures tonight, Sean?
Yeah, you're going to have to find a couple value plays that you like. The problem is they really aren't out there, so you're going to have to play like maybe you play a guy like Zach Cassian. He's
Yeah,
3K, but if he's playing with McDavid, hey, maybe a puck goes in off his butt. Who
yeah,
knows? So you're gonna. It's not a situation where you have tons of great options in the value department today. So you're gonna sort of have to find one or two and sort of hang your hat on them and be like, okay, maybe this guy can produce a score point for me. As you see, he's not great. So it's not like you're sitting there fist pumping this play, but you sort of see the last couple games, he's gotten 3+ points.
yeah.
That price point, that's really good. So playing with the best player in the world helps you produce. So I think you could do worse than doing something like that. Again, you have to check the lines and make sure that these guys are going to be playing together because a guy like this could easily be off the line for someone else on a given night. So you're going to have to find a couple value plays. There's not much out there, so you're just going to have to pick and choose and hope.
Yeah, so Cassian's a guy that I definitely missed on. So that 6 shot game, I was kind of staring him in the face on that showdown slate that I mentioned against Pittsburgh. Built a couple teams with him, ended up not going that direction. I guess wasn't really comfortable with his shot volume in general, but like you said, playing with Connor McDavid, it probably doesn't matter. His price on showdown is only 4,700, so he's still really cheap on showdown. So I'll be probably considering him more there if we do end up seeing him stay on that line. So Bobby Digital in the chat was asking if you guys like stacking 2 and GPP better than 3. I'd even take that a step further. I prefer to stack up like 3 to 4, but I actually like to stack up the power play unit more than even strength. I know I kind of differ from some of the Daily Roto guys on that opinion, but where do you sit on that, Sean? I know you were more of kind of a higher stakes cash game player ideally, but what do you think about stacking even strength lines versus power play lines? And would you prefer to get 3, 4? What do you kind of work with there usually?
Yeah, I'm more with Joe. I mean, in terms of correlation, what you look for is you have guys that correlate at all times together are greater than power play, which is greater than even strength. For me, that was always my preference. So if
Yeah.
I have 3 guys that skate together on even strength and power play, makes it a lot more likely that I'm going to jam them in. But for me, I would rather do, like in GPPs, I always prefer to do a 4-3-1 stack if I could, or a 3-3, maybe
Yeah.
1-1 or 3-3-2 stack, where I go 3 guys that correlate on the power play, preferably even strength as well, and then take a defenseman that's with them on the power play. So, for example, like Carolina tonight, I believe the top line is all skating together on the power play. They're all solid. And then you have Dougie Hamilton, who's a great shot producer, but he doesn't play with them on the power play. So
Right.
maybe I'll play Justin Falk. So, like, for example, you had Niederreiter, Aho, and Williams, all even strength, all power play. So what I'd like to do is I'd play those 4 or those 3 with Justin Falk due to the power play production as well. But in a vacuum, I probably prefer Dougie Hamilton. But for GPPs, I would probably more look at this option.
There you go, Bobby. Hopefully we answered your question there. What a transition by Sean though, because he like Dougie Hamilton's the guy that I wanted to bring up first when we talk about defensemen. So I agree with Sean. I kind of prefer like the kind of stack up one power play unit. Maybe you end up with some type of one off play. So Dougie Hamilton's the guy. If I am not stacking up the Carolina first power play unit, he makes a ton of sense as a one-off. So 95th percentile in shots over the past month, 97th in Corsi. So he's a guy that has been making a ton happen. He's someone that we've been using as kind of a high volume shooter for quite some time. This matchup against New Jersey, like I mentioned, 64th percentile, so slightly above average in their Corsi against. But Hamilton's the guy that, yeah, he's on the second unit, but he's still in the 80th percentile in power play shots. So he is the one that they're trying to get the puck to on this second power play unit for Carolina. So I like Hamilton quite a bit, especially at his price point. I think he's one of my favorite defensemen tonight. 5,300 on DraftKings seems like kind of a bargain. I guess, Sean, before I kick this to you, do you prefer Risto at a very kind of similar price point, only 400 more? Pretty similar, I guess, peripherals in a much tougher matchup, but I know you love your boy Risto.
Yeah, so in terms of in a vacuum, I would probably rather go with Dougie Hamilton. But again, if that top line is the main line I want to stack for
Right.
Carolina, if I'm playing GPPs, I'm probably playing a lot more Falk than I am Hamilton, just because the power play usage, and they're very similar anyways. But I prefer Risto, but that's more so because if I'm playing Skinner and Eichel, I really don't want to play Pominville. So if I'm doing a 3-man stack, I would do Skinner and Eichel with Risto. Whereas if I'm doing a 3-man stack on Carolina, I'm probably doing 3 skaters up front.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. Especially so Palmville at 3,800. Like if you really got in a position where you wanted to maybe just stack up this first line and then go elsewhere with kind of your more core stack, I think that he basically only makes sense in kind of that scenario. You mentioned my boy Justin Falk. I love this guy for DFS just because he shoots the puck so much and all of his shots are the majority coming on the power play. So 91st percentile in shots, but 95th percentile in power play shots over the past month. So he's leading basically this entire slate in power play shots. There's only 2 guys that are even close to him, Torrey Krug and Damon Severson for the New Jersey Devils. So let's talk a little bit about Torrey Krug. So I would imagine that this Boston stack is still going to be extremely popular, but same kind of thing. Like if we're going to stack up Bergeron and Marchand, I don't think there's going to be a ton of people that want to pair him with Heinen because he's not on the power play. So I think that a really popular stack today is going to be Marchand, Bergeron, Torrey Krug. Do you disagree?
No, I would agree with that. And quick, going back to Buffalo, we talk about there's not much value. If you're stacking Buffalo, you can do a lot worse than playing Jason Pominville in a stack because of his value, and there's not much out there. It's not like he's a terrible play, just not an elite level play that you'd want to make. But if you're looking for guys that are 3,800, which you're probably going to be looking for tonight, and you're playing Skinner and Eichel, you can do a lot worse than pairing them with Pominville. But yeah, for Boston, I think you're going to see a lot of Torrey Krug tonight. Between Krug, Risto, Falk, Hamilton. There's a lot of good defensemen, Spurgeon as well. There's a lot of options at defense, and they're all very similarly priced to me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like the fact that, though, I think it's pretty clear that if you're going to stack kind of power play units up, it's Marchand, Bergeron, Krug. If you're going to stack up Buffalo, it's basically Skinner, Eichel, and Risto. But if you need like a solid one-off play away from those stacks, I think it makes a lot of sense to go to someone like Dougie Hamilton. So I think that he's my clear kind of one-off play. Like in a vacuum, like you said, I think I prefer him on his own. But these other guys, obviously, you're going to kind of skew towards more correlation if there's any kind of tiebreaker there. So I'm kind of looking through the defensemen here. There's not a ton else that really stands out to me on the high end. It's kind of interesting to me. Ryan Suter actually 99th percentile in Corsi over the past month. I do think that this Minnesota team is somewhat interesting, and it just gives you another guy to correlate with Mikhail Granlund, with Zach Parise. I think those are the three guys that I prefer on this Minnesota power play unit. But what do you think about Suter? I mean, he's going to see obviously his time on ice, but I mean, his upside is probably a little bit more limited to some of these other guys we've talked about.
Yeah, his upside's gonna be more limited just because he's not a volume shooter. You see his shot volume's not huge, but again, if you're playing GPPs, you're more so playing trying to get score points, and he definitely has a chance to get assists on and off of goals. So I think Suter makes a decent amount of sense when you're stacking the guys from Minnesota.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm with you there. Let's check out maybe some value on the defense side of things. So we're going to need some value. And to be honest, there's really not a ton like just across the board. I think that one guy that kind of stands out to me, I love him as a player. So Brandon Montour for Anaheim, it's just a really tough spot to play him against the Boston Bruins, obviously. But he is a guy that's not scared to shoot the puck at 4,200. At least he's in the 85th percentile in shots plus blocks. So there's really not a ton else out there from that side of things. So I do want to get your take on this one. I don't think I've played this guy in like 4 years, Sean, but Zdeno Chara at 3,800 in this high total game, this great game environment against Anaheim. So Chara, I guess, hear me out though. At least his kind of floor, I think, is relatively safe at that price. So his shots plus blocks is basically one of the highest guys we have in this price range, under 4,500, 84th percentile there. It is a 95th percentile matchup as far as where shots are coming from. So I don't know. He's probably not a guy that carries a ton of upside, but if you just wanted like a pure punt, I mean, I think he gets you like 2 or 3 points.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, you see his block shot volume is very solid. You say if that's like 10 or 12 games, he's averaging about 4 peripheral stats a game or just a little under.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, maybe you add in, let's say, a half score point or something. You got a guy that you'd expect to get 2.5 points out of. You can definitely do a lot worse. And you know that
it's a 4-game slate. Like, you're going to need some value somewhere.
Exactly. Your options are limited. So you're going to have to make and choose someone. So I think he makes a decent amount of sense.
So Severson is probably my favorite guy if I'm going to pay down at defense, because I think he has at least some upside in tournaments, 97th percentile in power play shots. Don't love that, but if you're going to try and correlate Palmieri, Zajac, like at least kind of get access to some of those guys that maybe you don't want to have a high exposure to, Severson at 4K is someone that I was at least looking at. I do think he has more upside than Chara, but probably not near as much safety. Was there anyone else you were kind of looking at, Sean, at defense that we didn't mention? Doesn't have to be a value. I think that pretty much worked through everything on this 4-game slate for me.
Yeah, there's not much else. I mean, I like a lot of those 5K guys. The 5K guys seem to be the wheelhouse tonight, where you sort of want to be within that range if you can. And then after that, I think I'm probably going to end up saving a winner tonight. I would just find a couple that you're okay with and punt that way. It just seems to be the best option.
I'm with you, man. Before we get you out of here, I do kind of want to talk a little bit about tiers, because we have a ton of people in our Discord that are grinding tiers. So I don't have this ready, but I have it brought up here. So I'll kind of go through. So like the big decision in tier 1, like these are tough, right? So but what stands out to me is Bergeron and Marchand are in tier 1. So for me, I'm just not going to have much Boston tonight in tiers, because it doesn't make any sense to split those guys up in tier 1. So it's basically Bergeron, Marchand, Eichel, and McDavid in tier 1. I think it's probably Jack Eichel for me. Bergeron in cash games for sure, but you're going to have so much more stacking ability if you stack up Eichel. So Eichel in tier 1, tier 2 does have Skinner, so you can put both those guys together. Tier 3, Risto, so you can get that full stack we've been talking about with Buffalo in tiers 1 through 3. So Bergeron and Marchand together, that really kind of hurts their value to me. You can get Draisaitl in tier 2 if you wanted to go with McDavid and Draisaitl together. But what I really kind of am interested in is getting someone like Zach Parise in tier 3, I think, is super interesting because you compare him with Granlund, who's all the way down in tier 5, where I think a lot of people are probably going to play Torrey Krug. I think it's really interesting to go with Mikhail Granlund there. Let's see if there's anyone kind of in the deeper tiers that stands out. I mean, you can, if you want to play Pominville and get access to that top line for Buffalo, he's in tier 8. So there's not a lot of other guys that stand out in that tier. Jacob Slavin, Shattenkirk, Brad Hunt, like a lot of these guys are not going to get near kind of the opportunity I think that Pominville will. So that's kind of interesting. Let's see. My boy Evan Rodriguez in tier 7. Yeah, so, like these 4-game slates, it gets gross by the end of it. So Sean, Dahlin in tier 7. So the other guys you'd be kind of considering in that range are like Charlie McAvoy, DeBrusk for Boston. I would assume those Boston guys would probably be a little bit more popular. I'd probably prefer DeBrusk on that first power play for Boston. But what do you think about Dahlin just like stacking up Buffalo? Like you can just kind of add him to a few stacks most likely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially for GPP. Like you just said, it's going to be really difficult for the Boston guys to get there because there's really no correlation with them. So it's going to be tough to win stuff with them. I mean, you could, but then you go to tier 2. What do you know? You're going to play Skinner, and Skinner needs 3 points. Skinner gets 3 points. Jack Eichel is going to be on board with this.
You can stack up the entire power play unit for Buffalo in tiers, and that doesn't happen very often.
So I think that's a great way to approach tiers tonight in GPP is you just sort of avoid Boston and hope they don't really go off. And if they do, maybe they get a point or two, and then you hope Buffalo goes off.
Yeah, I'm with you. So there's a couple. We talked a lot about the Boston one, so we'll kind of focus on the other showdown slate. So it's Edmonton and Carolina. It's the first one. So Connor McDavid, by far the most expensive guy on the slate, but he's probably worth it. But playing him and Draisaitl really limits what you can do on showdown for sure. Sean, I want your take on goalies in showdown. I don't think we've ever talked about this on stream before. We've talked about it a lot off of stream, but what do you think as far as like the cash game versus GPP in showdown and in particular goalies?
Yeah, I'll be honest. Goalies in showdown is really tricky, and I'm still not sure what the best thing is. I've been following along with Joe's showdown when he plays showdown, and what it seems like in the GPPs, the winning team usually has the winning goaltender. They don't have both. So I think both goaltenders is almost for sure bad. And I think that in order to win the GPPs, you probably need the winning team's goaltender. That could change a little bit if, let's say, the game is 5-4 or 6-5 or something like that. Then it probably changes. But in any situation in which the goalie probably gives up less than 3 or less and they win, you probably want the winning goaltender for GPP. But goalie's really tricky. I'm just not sure exactly what the option is. The thing with goalie, though, is they're going to get statistics. You could play a guy who doesn't really take many shots or block shots or anything, and he may not get many statistics for a game, whereas the goalie's going to see shots whether they go in or not. So I'm not exactly sure what the proper protocol would be with goaltender in terms of cash games.
Yeah, so my, I guess, counter argument, at least in tournaments, is yeah, of course you see a guy with a goalie a ton at the top, but the thing is, you have to get everything else completely perfect for that to work out, because not only are you limiting your ceiling, like kind of what Sean mentioned, but you're also limiting your floor with correlation. So if you happen to not have one of these guys, so if you say you're playing the showdown with Edmonton today, and you end up with McDavid and you end up with Draisaitl, but you just so happen not to have Cassian, and Cassian gets an assist, something like that. Like just not having that one guy, and you're able to kind of jam in the goalie, like really hurts your floor as well. So it limits what you can do with correlation, basically. So I think there's two sides of it. I'm not really sure what's right either. I think it's slate specific for sure. It depends on pricing, depends on how high paced the game's going to be. But if you miss on goalie, obviously you're completely drawing dead. And if you don't play your goalie, you still have some outs. Like you're not going to catch anyone if you have the wrong goalie, I guess.
Correct. If you have the wrong goalie in GPP, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So that's the counter argument. Like you're not probably cashing any GPP if you have the wrong goaltender in, and that includes like if you have both goalies in, you're probably still screwed. So you really cannot ever play both goalies. You're limited to one goalie, and it's a matter of if that guy loses, you're screwed. And like having him is probably very bad. And even in both facets, if you have a losing goaltender, you're pretty screwed in terms of what's happening in terms of the showdown slates.
Yeah, someone in chat's like, I hate goalies. I'm with you, man. Just play tiers. No goalies in tiers. So, yeah, so definitely jump in the Discord. We'll be talking a lot more about showdown. Doozy's been grinding that a ton with me. So if you're interested in that, the Discord is kind of the place to go for that conversation any further. So I guess before we get out of here, probably should remind you guys, am doing a resub contest. Do this every month on Twitter. So if you've been gifted a sub, this is your first time here, welcome. But if it's not your first time here and you have a sub, Monkey Knife Fight was nice enough to give away a bunch of free money, honestly. So if you hit me up in the Discord with a screenshot of your resubscription on Twitch, and then also your Monkey Knife Fight deposit confirmation, if you use promo code Holka, you can send me a screenshot of that, and then you'll have access to this free roll tournament on DraftKings. If you get first place, $100 credit at Monkey Knife Fight, all the way down to 10th place. Depending on how many people we get in this tournament, your odds are very good on cashing one of these prizes for sure. So if you're planning on playing the NHL slate, doesn't have anything going on with NBA yet. So that's kind of the big slate that I think a lot of people are going to be jumping into. So make sure you get into the resub contest for sure. We've been talking a lot about props, a lot about Monkey Knife Fight. So we do have some free prop bets channels in the Discord: Bovada, Bet Online, MyBookie. We play them all. That's kind of the best way to do these props, is to really shop around for some of the best lines. So those are the free channels in Discord. If you want access to any of the premium ones, obviously those are for Twitch subscribers only. So definitely check that out. As far as other kind of news and notes, that's pretty much it. I always like to remind you guys, if you do have an Amazon account, an Amazon Prime subscription, you automatically have a Twitch Prime subscription. So if you want to support what I'm doing here, just make sure you're taking advantage of that. That's kind of the best way to go about supporting this for free. Hopefully do some more NHL content over the next couple days. Definitely want to try and get a bunch of this out, since a lot of people are probably playing this for the first time. And then we'll try and get out a bunch of this content on YouTube where I can as well. But Sean, I appreciate you jumping on with us, man. Any final thoughts? I don't know if we'll be able to get you for another day. I know you got a busy weekend with some other sports and stuff that you're grinding, but appreciate you doing this, man. It's been a while since we actually broke down a slate, so it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it was a good time getting back on. So of course the Saber slate helps, so that's definitely a plus. So
Yeah.
make sure you stack your Sabres tonight, win some money.
All right. So be sure and follow Sean on Twitter. He's at PSUFans2. Steve in the chat said he just jumped on. Gonna have to catch the replay. Yeah, man, no worries on that. He says it's you might as well not lose some cash in NHL. So that's the way to go about it. This is one of the best things to grind this time of year, guys. So give it a shot, and we'll see you guys all in the Discord. Good talk. See you out there.